This is June 18th, 2008 at 2:15, and we are interviewing Lou Hallenbeck in his Albany, New York home. He served in the United States Navy from September 1942 through January 1946. June and Ken Hunter are conducting the interview. Please tell us your name and when and where you were born.
Louis Hallenbeck. I was born in Albany, November 25th, 1919.
Okay. Now, tell us, what did you do before you went into the Navy?
Well, before I went in the Navy, I was an engineer. I had graduated from Union and was in New York City working on my master's degree when the war started, and it was necessary then to make different plans. So I was living in New York on December 7th there.
Okay. Now, were you drafted or did you enlist?
No, I enlisted before I could be drafted. No, procedure as you went, I found there was a recruiting officer for engineers for the Seabees. So I went down in the Naval office in New York and got interviewed for that and made out the papers, and a couple of months later, all of a sudden, why, they said you're in. So they give you just a few days notice, and had time to buy a uniform and head out for Norfolk, which is where I, at that time, later was a big CB base.
Now, what do you mean by CB?
Oh, CBs were the construction battalions of the Navy. It was originated in the spring of '42 when they found that the civilian contractors had been working out on the bases in the Pacific were having trouble with, in case they were captured in enemy fire and so on. So they decided that they would have service personnel do the work.
And I take it you were a civil engineer?
Civil engineer.
Mm-hmm.
What was the training like to get you into the military mode to do things the way they wanted things to be done?
Well, it was kind of a rush course. I think it took about 3 weeks. We had a certain amount of close order drill and Navy etiquette traditions and whatnot. And well, it was the officers had a different training than the men did. But so we had I think it was about 2 or 3 week program, and they were in a hurry to rush us through it. The men had about same thing, I think, 3 or 4 weeks of basic training, in which case some of them went on to further detail in training in the various specialties.
Did they introduce you into the use of weapons?
I think somewhere along the line, yes, we must have had they did have a rifle range there, and were trained in now our battalion was equipped with carbines. We didn't carry Garand rifles. Actually, once we got the weapons, then they were all kept in the gunnery office there, and very seldom were any men carrying a rifle. Just a few people on guard duty. We weren't terribly armed.
Mm-hmm. So where did you go after that basic training?
Well, I think I was there about a month, and then I found that I was not destined not been assigned to a construction battalion. I was assigned to construction duty supervising civilian contractors. And the first place I was down in Florida, Vero Beach, Florida, building a naval air station there. I was there until the spring of '83, and then we was in Bunker Hill, Indiana, which is a name, and another Navy. That was a Navy air station they were building there. At that point, I guess I thought that I got kind of agitated, decided I ought to be doing something more, and so I did ask to go back in the construction battalions. And so they returned, by that time, the big CB base was in Williamsburg, Virginia, Camp Perry. And so I ended up down there. And it was a huge base. They had like 50,000 men there. A battalion coming in and leaving every week. And it was a big operation. It had become that.
But how many men were assigned into a battalion?
About 1,200.
And they were all different kind of trade specialties?
That was the idea. In fact, I found out later that they had a IBM system that had somehow classified everybody as to what specialty. So when we needed them, they were there. Like we had a certain number of carpenters, electricians. We had one time when we got some vehicles, we found that 2 men were experts on automobile tires and truck tires. It was very good in that way. We would look for somebody and he was there, and we didn't really know till we asked which they were. It was a good thing because the battalions were all going out different places, and sometimes you don't need all those specialties, and sometimes you did. So anyway, I was in Williamsburg then, and then I was assigned to, the second time through the program, I was assigned to this battalion. And in the meantime, I got promoted from ensign to lieutenant junior grade, and so as a result of that, I was assigned as commander of headquarters company, and this battalion was being formed. The battalion was a little to my disappointment at the time, was a stevedore battalion, and most of the jobs were moving cargo wherever we were. But headquarters company, I had carpenters, electricians, machinists, and so on in my company. And we had very competent men in those battalions because they'd all joined up on the basis of their specialty. And a lot of them most of them were older than me. They were older people and experienced and were very dedicated, or a lot of them didn't have to join, they did though. And so I always thought the morale was very good. I spent, a couple of years at least with this battalion and really appreciated what they were and what they did. They worked hard and got a lot done.
Now, from this training down in Florida and building these bases, where did you go from there?
From there I went down, back to the CB training base in Williamsburg, Virginia. And from that I joined this battalion.
And what were they preparing the battalion to go to?
Well, we didn't know at the time. In fact, the way it was set up, you had, I don't know how many weeks of training, and then you got to leave before you went overseas. And so the East Coast people all went on this leave, and their thought was then we'd be in California, and then the West Coast people could have the leave. But then it turned out, like the way it is in the service, the plans changed, and we went up to Rhode Island for the winter, and the West Coast guys then had a 3-week leave or something. So they got to go home too. So anyway, yeah, we were, after leave, we went to Rhode Island, and in fact, they went to work there right away because it was a stevedore strike. So they called us in to do the work. It only lasted a few days, but at that point, the outfit we were supposed to go with, I understand, the place we were supposed to go was a place called Funafuti down in the South Seas, and somebody decided they didn't need us, or they didn't have enough ships. So we spent the winter in Rhode Island. Wasn't all bad for me because I worked in New York, and I got to spend weekends in New York City for the winter. Even got all the way home one weekend. We weren't supposed to, had to have special permission to go that far from Rhode Island. But
How did you get back and forth?
so out here, oh, I remember now, I took a bus from Providence to Albany. I didn't know there was such a thing, but it did. So my family lived in Amsterdam, and was 30 miles west of here. So anyway, we were in Rhode Island until about the 1st of April, and then we got called to ship out, and took a train down to Norfolk and got on a ship to go across through the canal out to the Pacific.
Was that the first time you'd ever been on a ship?
One like that anyway, I guess so, yeah. I hadn't been on the ocean before, come to think of it. I'd been on some boats on the canal, but I went, man, some of the people got really seasick going along the Atlantic coast. But, and we were on this, one thing had happened in the meantime. They had taken, we'd been left with half a battalion. I was in, the companies were A, B, C, and D, and we had A company and C companies, and D and B were taken off and to go other places, so we only had half a battalion. On the ship we went over with was our battalion, half battalion, and a battalion of Marines. So it was an interesting trip through the canal and out to Hawaii. We got to Hawaii, they had lots of work lined up for us. There was a tremendous buildup of armed forces in Hawaii at that time, and there was a lot of battalions, and we were assigned, and we worked there from April until September, and worked the ships in Pearl Harbor there. So at that time, of course, we got to see an awful lot of ships. The whole Pacific Fleet was operating out of there.
Did you see any of the ships that were the victims of the Japanese bombing on December 7th?
Yes, they were still there. Of course, there's still one of them, two of them are still there, some are sunk, but that harbor was a mess because they'd been hit so hard, although it was 2 years earlier. They hadn't had a chance to repair them or ship them out or anything. So that left a big impression on Hawaii, of course, that attack.
And then, okay, now you mentioned you sailed in the South Pacific. Can you tell us, like, what was life like on the ship? What kind of food did you have? What were your sleeping quarters like?
Also, what was it like going through the Panama Canal?
Well, this was a ship we went on, I think the name was the Knox. It was a Navy-operated transport. And so we had, reasonably good Navy food. I can't remember what the quarters were like, but the officers probably had a decent place to be, and our battalion, we had headquarters, we could continue our organization and so on there. Kind of a long trip through the canal, down the coast through the canal and out to Hawaii.
Do you remember about how many days that took?
Well, I would say about 3 weeks, but
Mm-hmm.
one thing that we,
Today.
in the Pacific, going from Panama to Pearl Harbor, it requires so much fuel that they we had two submarine, or not pardon me, a destroyer that was company was our convoy that's over there, had to stop, slow down and refuel the destroyer. Little incidents, they had to they fired a line over to, I guess it was one over to the destroyer, and they shot one over to us that wheeled in, and they hit one of our guys, hit him in the head. But it turned out it wasn't fatal, he just tore his face up a little. One of the little incidents you run into. The men all took it pretty well, I guess. They were interested in getting out to Pearl Harbor. A lot of them really thought they'd see some exciting action along the way, you know.
But they didn't.
Well,
Just that.
it all depends. Enough for some, too much for some, not enough for others. But when Pearl Harbor was mainly a workplace, it was kind of nice in a way. We had organized the crews into each company into 6 gangs. When we work a ship, there's 5 hatches on the ship, so there was one extra one. So we would only send 5 crews out, and the others would have a day off. And they would prefer to do was take one of our trucks and drive around the island, which was generally, I've did that different times with a group, and go drive over the north side of Oahu there and go swimming and all different things. So in that way it was kind of nice. I think a lot of them enjoyed life in Pearl Harbor. However, after 4 or 5 months there, whatever it was, I think they were eager to get out and do something else, which we got to do. Well, we were there, and while we're there in Pearl, they got the ships all loaded up for the invasion of the Marianas, and after that was done, then the next step was to get this, and I suppose the Marshall Islands have been done too, was a big major thing to go out to the Carolines. So we waited, we saved us for that. So we went out to load us on a ship and went to Eniwetok, which was in the Marshall Islands. Had been recently, a big atoll had been recently taken over. And I don't believe that I was ashore in Eniwetok. I was there for a short time, only worked in the harbor. And then they loaded us up for the long trip to Ulithi. And we went, I think at that time we were broken up into different ships, and but we all met when we got out there. And that was a long haul, and it was still somewhat dangerous territory. And the procedure on the ship we were on, I was on one of the slower ships, it was in a convoy. They were concerned about Japanese attacking. So every night at the danger time was at sunset, when the Japanese would have a better opportunity to submarines to see you when you couldn't see them. So we got all the whole crew, all our whole battalion out on deck there with our life jackets on, and somebody would have a hatchet ready to cut the rope on the lifeboats in case we had to jump off. But we didn't. We got there all right. But I guess that was a standard thing, that everybody had to be ready to go. Then after that, after that hour or so was over, then you could go and eat dinner. But
Now, what were your duties? I'm sure you didn't have the opportunity to sit in a deck chair or anything all that time.
No, actually, it wasn't much you could do with that number of men on that ship. Some of the men might have some duties, just taking care of the. And I'm trying to think that
They probably had to
Have
be
some
painting.
well, the crew, the ship had a crew that did that. We more or less just took care of ourselves. I don't think the guys had any time to clean up their rifles or anything. It's too bad I don't remember that part of it. I remember later, I'm trying to think when that was, we would, the men were all, the ships were quite, I think this was maybe after leaving Ulithi on the way to the Philippines, that the men were all in bunk down below, and the officers, we had found out a way we could sleep up on deck there, and we'd send the, as somebody said, it was pretty hot, we wanted something to drink, so we sent the pharmacist mates over to sick bay to get ice water for us to drink. So we got taken care of. Oh, that was another bad thing on that ship. They played poker every night. And, I mean, you see, what did we do? And unfortunately, or fortunately, seemed to win. So as long as I was winning, I couldn't quit. So I had to keep coming back playing. I had no great amount of money, but it seemed like I got tired of playing these same guys every night, and the same people would lose. But sounds like exciting days there on the ship. I don't know, I'm trying to think what we did do with all the men.
What about showering? Water, was it rationed? Did you have a routine as you're only allowed so much time in a shower?
I hadn't thought of that. I don't recall that. They must have had some time. Maybe they couldn't take a shower every day. It was just certain times. Because you'd have, otherwise you'd have, or else it would be salt water. They didn't have enough fresh water on the ship for these long cruises, 30 days without us. They would have to.
They need a shower sometime.
Yeah, must have gotten the water somewhere, but I don't remember how they portioned that out. We could keep. It's like somehow the laundry got done, everything got taken care of. They cooked, got the food served and washed up the dishes, and the time those cruises at least that part of them. Later it wouldn't be practical, but there must have been some way to give the people some instruction as what they were doing. I have one picture here of, I think it's the guys up on deck and somebody's reading to them, but. So we were in Eniwetok only a few days, as I said, and we went on to Ulithi. And Ulithi was a huge lagoon that for some reason, the Japanese had abandoned it. And there was, again, we came in, there was practically no opposition at all. So as long as there wasn't anybody there, they examined it and thought that it would be a great place for the fleet to reconnoiter or meet there. And they had hundreds of ships there would come in. And for various times they'd come in and load up their ammunition and everything and then take off for another invasion or something. So they were, the lagoon played a good part with them. Well, then that kept us busy because our job was to load all the ammunition for all these ships. And some of it was kind of interesting. The men enjoyed going over and working on a battleship or something, bringing the things in. But basically it was hard work. And we worked 2 shifts, from a day shift and a night shift. So it kept them pretty busy. we had 2 companies left and the 6 gangs in each one. So one company worked days and one would work nights, and then after a while they'd change. And sometimes there wouldn't be that much work, but I'd say it was pretty steady work. And some other outfits, we were the only stevedore battalion there, but some other crew people were doing the same thing, trying to keep the ships all ready to go. And then a ship would come in, some of them were very badly damaged, had to be repaired enough so they could haul them on to the next place. In that way, we felt very close to the thing.
So your group helped repair these ships?
Repair them? No, we're not really. They had, I think, we wouldn't do much of that. Some special thing. There were, I think there was repair ships in there.
We probably had floating dry docks
Floating
too.
dry docks,
Right.
yeah. Repair ships. Now, the Japanese, having abandoned the lagoon there, they weren't prepared to have us in there, and they tried to get us out. They had, and I never knew exactly how this worked. At the 2 islands, between the 2 islands at the entrance of the lagoon, there was a net up in some way, and you could lower it to get through or something. But these Japanese subs, I think it was a midget sub that came through between under the net and came in and hit a tanker, and that burned and created a lot of attention. And of course it also realized that there were these ammunition ships in harbor too. If it happened, the Jap sub had happened to hit that, it would have been very serious. So attempts were made to keep the subs out of there, and also to hit them after they got in. And I don't know how much, but there had been some problems. Later there was Japanese aircraft would come in, and they were they were in a spot where they were like suicide missions. They didn't send in all the planes from the aircraft carrier. They sent in a few of them, and the pilots were supposed to go and hit something and crash them and damage the ship, blow it up or something. Now, later, I remember reading about the Okinawa invasion, that those suicide planes did a lot of damage. However, in Ulithi, I'd say it was minor, but they did hit. One time they came in there, and flew right over our ship. We were on this hotel ship we were on. Of course, the guy was, I figured, they send him in, he's got to hit something, and he knows he's going to get killed. And he didn't want to run into a battleship or something. I mean, I don't know what he did. He flew on over, got over beyond us, and went over in the mess hall. There was on the island there was a mess hall, and some of the guys cleaning up the place, and he hit that. Because, it's a sad thing. They were, I think one problem the Japanese had was that they lost so many pilots, and they didn't, this is another story, but they didn't retrieve them. When they send them out and they couldn't land, they just leave them out there. And eventually they lost too many pilots. Now, one thing the American Navy, maybe we had the equipment to do it, but we tried to retrieve every plane that was shot down. Couldn't do all of them, but an awful lot of them did get retrieved. So days in Ulithi was just working on the ships, and the other, well, what else did we do? one thing about it was interesting, to me anyway. The island, Ulithi, was a north anchorage and a south anchorage, and we were in south anchorage. In the north anchorage, there was, all the natives had been moved up there. So we had our chaplain on the ship, our battalion was a Catholic priest from Trenton, New Jersey, and he would go up to say mass for the natives up there. So I sometimes could get we'd take one of our boats we had and go up there. So I got a chance to go up and see the natives, which ordinarily we weren't allowed to do. It was very interesting. They lived a very simple life there. They just lived on coconuts and fish and a few things like that, and didn't wear hardly any clothes, and had gotten along there for many years. The Spanish had come in and taken over the islands, but they didn't bother much. Then later the Japanese did. But anyway, they were friendly to us as far as we could see. And eventually, when the war was over, we moved back off of their island, and they took us back down there. Other incidents there was, because the fleet would come in with a huge number of men, and one of the things they wanted was recreation. So, in the Navy, you know, you're not allowed to drink any aboard any of the Navy ships or anything. So we had this whole island that turned into a recreation island, where the name of the place was Mogmog Island. So we'd go to Mogmog, and Sunday afternoon, I'd take a company over there, and we'd play softball. I guess I'd pitch for the headquarters company team, and the other officer pitched for the cooks and bakers that we played. So we played a lot of games over there, and a lot of the men would go over there and swim. That was one thing we had. We had lots of having the boats from the ship, and we had to have them to go around and go out different places with us. So we could get around, but there wasn't any place much to go. Well, sometimes we got to go over to the headquarters island, but that wasn't terribly interesting. So we're there for Christmas, and sometime around spring, we headed on to the next place, which was the Philippines. I was thinking, well, no particular change of, well, the Philippines was operated about like the Ulithi. Again, our battalion was broken up into different ships. Some of them come in LCIs, some of them in LSTs, and we arrived in Leyte Gulf. And
For those that don't know, the LCI was a landing craft infantry.
Infantry, yeah.
And the other one was the
LCT, tank, LCT, that were the ones that moved the tanks. And the big ones were the LSTs, they were landing ship tanks. My brother was in the Navy, same time I was, went in right out of college and got a commission. He was in the amphibious. And he was out there in the Gilbert Island invasion. They had come back to Pearl Harbor, and on his way home, so I got to see him then, the only time I saw him through the whole war. Then he went out again and for the invasion of Japan, which never occurred, so they went back home early.
Did you ever get much mail when you were in the service, or able to send it out?
Well, the mail, yeah, actually our battalion had 2 mailmen. That was their civilian job. They were supposed to take care of the mail. Now, after we got settled on like we were in Ulithi for a while, the mail would come in regularly every couple days a week or something. But then you go for a month or more, we're traveling from one island to the other, and there isn't any mail, obviously. They'd find out where we were, and then they'd start sending it out again. And sometimes we'd get routed around the wrong islands and everything. Now, my mother used to write, there were two of us, right? One of us one day and one the other, more or less. So we would hear, when we got the letters, we would hear from home. But of course, we weren't able to tell them much what we were doing.
I take it the mail was censored?
Oh, it was censored, yeah. We censored, the battalion censored its own mail. But we didn't, I didn't take advantage of it. Now, some people had arranged a code so they could notify their wife where they were by saying, we're going to see Aunt Sally or something like that. But they didn't. I got the idea eventually. They thought we were in the Philippines long before we were, I guess. Because I guess we mentioned some of there's some clippings I have in newspaper articles about Ulithi and about the fleet there. We were in the Philippines. Was a similar operation to Ulithi in that we were out on the, we're back on our barge. You've seen I have pictures of it here. And the men had their quarters down below, and that's where the dining room hall was and everything. And so in that way it was the same. Now, we didn't, I was going to say, I did go ashore in the Philippines, but I think we just had to get a special deal to get a boat, go over to Leyte, Tacloban and Leyte Island to, I don't know, I'd say pick up the mail, but it seems like it was more than that. But that was done, but in general, the men weren't allowed to go on any of the islands. And of course, most of them had all been cleared of Japanese by then, but anyway, and they had an island. I've got a picture of the place. I didn't realize, no, it was a Philippine island that we had there for Recreation Island that the fleet had. But they were all brought in there by the boats from their ships, and then went back at night, and didn't really mingle with the Filipinos that much at that time. We had one man in our outfit that had come from the Philippine Islands, at least his family had. And after the MacArthur's troops had cleared the island of Luzon, the big island where Manila is, he got permission to go up there and catch some flight up there, and went to visit his family. But sure enough, he came back in a week like he was supposed to, because he heard we were leaving, I guess. Anyway, so it did get a little word in here and there about people, but not too much. And and I got the newspaper, copies of that our battalion published, and I thought in general there was a attempt to keep morale up pretty well. Some of the men were disappointed they weren't near the action, and then after you saw some plane get shot down or something, they weren't so interested. But anyway, you had to have any choice. You had to do what we were told to do, and some battalions were landed on the islands under fire and were on the beach for days before the Japanese were cleared off. But we happened to end up on this big ship, the boat we landed on, APL-14. They call it the Ritz-Carlton. And it was very, very pleasant in some ways. Because, well, the ship had its own crew. I don't know how many men. They couldn't move it around, but they had uh, their own galley, cooks and stuff, and 2 or 3 officers. And when we first got there, our commanding officer outfit thought he'd take over their quarters, but it turns out he wasn't allowed to do it. So we moved up on the top deck. Being Seabees, we had access to all kinds of stuff. We got built cabins for the officers up on top, so we could be up there and the ship's guys could be down below. There was a big mess hall down there. I guess probably that was this chief's quarters, chief petty officers. That was supposed to be our place, but we finally moved upstairs and they had that, but we would eat down there with them. And they were, you know, as the years went by, you got to know them all pretty well. And I don't think there was a lot of military discipline at all times there.
Did they keep you aware of how the progress of the war was going on?
Oh, yeah. Well, that was one thing, yeah. They had this Armed Forces radio. Would continue to, every day, send out information on that. Then we would get some kind of, whole thing was printed up and sent around. So I think we got a good idea of how it was going, and particularly, a lot of the people were interested in how it was going in Europe, which was a lot bigger war than what we had, because until the time we landed in the Philippines, well, there wasn't any action on the part of American troops in Europe, except for Italy and Africa. Yeah, we knew pretty much what was going on, and I guess the word got over there pretty well too. Some of these things like became well known, like Iwo Jima and some of them.
Did you hear any propaganda coming from the Japanese islands?
Tokyo Rose, some of the people used to listen to that. She would be on the radio, and I don't know whether it was all radios or not, but we didn't listen. Yeah, they always had this, and you know, they had a program, and they had English-speaking people talking, giving them all bad information, I would say, saying that Americans were losing all these ships and all these men, and Japanese were winning, and all the troubles that were coming up and so on. So in general, I didn't pay much attention to it, and I don't know as the men did, because it sounded like it was pure baloney, you know. But it's what we were close enough to them that we could get their radio. And they had programs of just apparently set up for us and for well, there weren't many French troops there, it was all Americans, basically.
You mentioned that the holidays, did you have special meals for like Christmas time?
Christmas, they did have a big dinner there. It wasn't, no, we didn't, I don't think we really stocked up, like had turkeys come in for Thanksgiving or something. But the food did come in good. And we had one later on Peleliu, we had some benefit of that when we got there, we had trucks unloading the ships and bring the food came ashore. We'd have a truckload of turkeys or something, or roast beef coming, or meat or something. So we'd just divert one of those trucks into our battalion headquarters there, and one night I went down, I guess I was, my roommate was a chaplain, I think, at that time. He woke me up and said, come on, there's a truck coming in with all this food. And sure enough, it went out, and all the guys were up. I woke them all up, and they were sitting in the mess hall eating them. They figured to eat it up before somebody found out. So we did get pretty good food in general. I mean, what you get, this Australian beef was hard to eat. The Navy cooks, I guess, did a reasonable job. They claimed the flour had weevils in it and so on. I guess you lose. I did notice this though. We'd be there on our barge there, and the crews that come in that work stevedoring out there, and they just eat tons of food. And for us, it was really couldn't eat that much, but they really worked up a good appetite. And even though it was hot, the weather was hot so much they got used to it. No air conditioning or anything. Well, I'll leave you. What? So far, we're still in the Philippines, right? In Leyte Gulf.
Do you have any occasion to see or hear General MacArthur?
We didn't know. We didn't see him. Well, okay. That's a Hawaii story. Can we drop back there? We were in Hawaii. One thing we did do, what did happen, Roosevelt came over as president and made a trip to Hawaii, and MacArthur had flown up from Manila to meet with him, and so they were together, rode through there's a big, some huge camp there full of Seabees, and he came over and talked to the troops there and so on. So we did know that MacArthur was there, and of course Nimitz's command of the Pacific Fleet, he was located in Pearl Harbor. Not that we'd see a lot of them. Can I go? I go back to Pearl Harbor a minute. What happened in Pearl Harbor, I never heard much about any other place. But one night they woke us up and said that they got all our rifles were stored in the armory. They got them out, give them out because there was some colored troops had been shipped over there, and they understood they were going to be shipped on to Guam, and so they were revolting, and they thought they might come down and attack our camp. Well, nothing happened. So then it was a joke for a while after that. Somebody said, well, they gave out this ammunition, but it didn't all get back, and we know how we're going to use it, but nothing happened like that. There was that one incident, I guess it really worried them. Nimitz thought that some of the people, it would be a mutiny and they would take over part of the island or something. Didn't happen anyway.
As the battle was winding down in the Pacific, did you hear anything about the atomic weapons, the bombs being dropped in Japan?
Well, not till it happened. No, I think that was a big secret from everybody. Well, we were in, we were in Pearl Harbor. No, we were in the Philippines. And then, that time they were already getting ready for the invasion of Japan. And we were the 18th Special Battalion. The 17th Special was in Peleliu. So we were supposed to take their place. So they sent me over with, I had, 12 or 15 men, or maybe 20, to take over their camp and operate it until the rest of the battalion arrived. So after that, the whole battalion was quarantined. They got dysentery. So they were laid up there till after the war ended. So we were left on Peleliu to celebrate the end of the war by ourselves. Well, it was a little inconvenient. The mail didn't come over there much for us, and we weren't in touch with the guys. But so after the war ended, they finally moved them on into Peleliu. And then we weren't on the barge anymore. We had our own mess hall. We had our own trucks hauling things around. Instead of, up till then, the guys that instead of running trucks had been running boats around the harbor. And so then we had places to, we didn't have much to build because it was all built, but put everybody to work. Now I have some pictures of Peleliu, most vivid ones I have anywhere. So we were there, and of course the war ended. The war had already ended. So the next thing was getting back. And they used to say, your destination for the duration. So then they had this point system, and you got to go home, you got discharged by the number of points. Well, some of the guys had been in longer, and of course they had, if they were married, you got extra points. And I don't know about your children, but a lot of them got moved out pretty rapidly. So probably we lost at least half our men by the December when the battalion broke up finally. It was a little disappointing. My brother had gotten married during when he returned from the Gilbert Islands thing. And they also, he may have been in more battle stars or something, so he was, on the time I got home, he already was, had a job, and they had a new baby, and were living in Schenectady, so. But, so eventually, the war ended, and we were sent, the battalion was deactivated. About that time, while we were still in Peleliu, the officers that had been in charge of the battalion they got enough points and they left, so I was in charge when the thing folded up. If you see any of these things around here, I was a commanding officer there at the end. So then they got orders December 1st to leave. The battalion was going to be deactivated and returned to the U.S. So the guys all marched down to the docks. But unfortunately, the orders for the officers didn't come in. We couldn't go without orders. So we got left there. And the men were all home by Christmas, of course. But we were still in the island on like the 20th. Our orders came in, but then there wasn't any ships to go back to the States. So we got, I think it was around the 20th of December, the ship came, and it was going to New Zealand. Anyway, it goes south of us, so we went down to Noumea. And we took that, and we were down there Christmas Day. New Year's Day, we crossed the international date line. And the ship then was supposed to stop in Hawaii, but they got orders not to stop and go right to San Francisco. So we got to San Francisco. We got there, it was amazing welcome to, I mean, they must have been used by then, the troops coming back. But every place you were, you go in, we had to wait there about 5 days to get transportation. But every place you were, like in a restaurant, you'd let you go ahead in the line and everything. There was a welcome to all the troops. Oh, I took a train back to the East Coast and still had lacked, I don't know, 1 or 2 points or something. So I went down to New York. So many days leave, I went down to New York and sign out, and they said, well, if you only have less than 1 point, you can leave the Navy now. So I said, okay, and had to stay another day to get my papers all made out, and I left. I did have two different later 2 weeks tour of duty in the Navy, one in Washington and one in Boyd Bennett Field, New York. Of course, then Crean was along with me on those trips. But I was glad, I was willing to leave, although I think the Navy treated us well, from what I could see of what other people had. And I learned a lot from it, experience. And as I made the decision not to go back to New York, and luckily I went down to the New York office, Corps of Engineers, and they said, well, there's a lot of jobs in Syracuse, you may want to transfer up there. That seemed a lot better than New York, which always seemed like kind of a hurried place, so we went to Syracuse.
Did you pick up any souvenirs while you were over?
Well, this is one. Now, when the Japanese surrendered on the Peleliu Islands, they had to naturally turn in all their equipment and all their weapons. And they gave out to there were probably 50,000 Japanese and 5,000 or 6,000 Americans there, so we all got them. And they got, the enlisted men got Oriska rifles and the officers got samurai swords. So I brought it home. I never have known of any use for it. I got this upside down. The nice sword, we had this Japanese, a few years later, we had this Japanese boy live with us. And I said, well, now, maybe you can read all Japanese letters on it. You can tell me, probably has the name of the man it belonged to. Well, they had this way, have this way of not really telling you. If he knew, we couldn't tell. But he said, well, that's a very fine name there. Do you think it belonged to me? Oh, I doubt it. Well, okay. Now, a lot of people gave their swords. There still is a move to give the swords back, and they'll go back to Japan, but mine's been sitting in the closet all these years. Well, that's my main souvenir. Must be some others. Not too much. We had, I came back with just a Foot Locker. Had my uniforms in, which we hadn't worn out in the islands. We just wore khaki, well, green. I had these green outfits we wore. So that was something different too.
Okay, well,
Did you participate in any kind of reunion since you got out of the Navy?
Well, I left the Navy in January, and by that fall was the first reunion of our battalion. And I didn't even think of such a thing would occur, but it did. It was down at the Ritz-Carlton Hotel in New York, and I had tickets to a Syracuse football game in New York, so went down and went to reunion, and there was a surprising group of people. And it was interesting in some ways. There's one other officer there, I guess our commanding officer maybe, showed up. But during the war, there's officers and there's men, and I got to know a lot of them pretty well, because particularly the ones from the East. But so from then on, they're the ones that really participated in the reunions, and we got to know quite well. There's a boy from Corning who was, and we were living in Hornell. He was electrician's mate in the service and became literally, stop.
well, you got another minute.
He became city engineer in Corning, so we went to reunions together. He and his
You mentioned earlier that you and your wife took a cruise and visited some of these sites in the Pacific.
Yeah, we did. Unfortunately, we didn't get to most of the islands we were in. I mean, you couldn't. We did go to Yap Island, which is very interesting and very primitive. And it's the nearest thing to Ulithi, which is not open to cruises stopping at all. And so from there we crossed on up to Guam. So we crossed the route that we were on before, but we didn't actually visit the same islands. But we got a good picture of what wife got a little picture of what the Pacific Islands looked like and what the life was there.
Well, I'm sorry to say our time is up, and we thank you very much for your service to our country and for doing this interview.
And at the end of this tape, I'll add on a picture here of you during those times that you served in the Pacific, along with some of the medals and awards you were given.
Reunion, so I ended up with a plaque, and then they placed to send it now.
This is the actual emblem
That's our
of the unit.
Uh-huh. It is, and we used to have it set up outside our headquarters in the various places we were.